Me, learning is when things are not understood only in isolation, when there's a connection made. And that's when I think we get to more of the higher order type thinking, which I think is sorely lacking at the moment. And can I actually think for myself? Is that even allowed? It's making teachers worry more about compliancy and the completion of meaning often the people giving the instruction are not the people in a classroom there every day. And we're not giving enough space to the lived experience, the person on the ground. What are they doing? What are they finding? And why aren't they included enough in the discussion? They're always spoken about, but never to. They're never part of the engagement.
Because no learning is going to take place if no teaching takes place. And AI can provide an answer, but it cannot teach unless it is given the pedagogy.
Well, we're not really, wanting you to think for yourself. Just follow this and then you're good. And then I think it's the fact that we struggle to implement and to plan the pedagogy, how we teach, how will we implement it, how will we use this tool effectively to enhance teaching and learning.
All right. Good evening, Tania. Tania Tryon. You and I think, are going to have such a valuable discussion tonight, about AI in education. What I've seen, from the responses you sent me, what I have assumed from our chats on LinkedIn, there seems to be quite a lot in your mind. So please go ahead and just introduce yourself first. Just tell us a bit where you fit into the bigger educational system, and then we'll take it from there into the AI world.
Okay. All right. So I'm Tania Tryon. I'm currently based at a school, and I am involved in a lot of things to do with education, leadership, management, um, AI in education, education in general, the bigger scheme of things. Yes. So I've been doing a lot of writing. I write a lot about leadership issues, management, curriculum design, and obviously how those all integrate into each other. And often from the lived experience of somebody on the ground, who is thinking about these other things, but also has that tangible access to what is it like on the daily basis, what actually happens, and how does policy actually get implemented in reality, and what are the challenges and pitfalls, etc., etc. So yeah, that's a bit about me and what I do.
Okay, there are a couple of very valuable points that you've made, and I would like to see them come together. But the first thing that I'm thinking of, and I often wonder about this because this is not really a field that I'm involved with, but if you say curriculum design, I see that often in people's bios on LinkedIn, and I'm thinking, okay, but in South Africa, we have got CAPS. That is the curriculum. So when you do curriculum design, what exactly does that mean?
I think in my case, it means what do we actually do with the CAPS and these curriculums that are mandated to us? And how do we actually implement that in a practical sense? What is the daily operational issues? What works, what doesn't work? What are the challenges? And a lot of my exposure to curriculum design and policy comes through my master's degree, which focused mainly on that and the restrictiveness of CAPS, the pacing, and sort of how I was able and how you're able to create some sense of flexibility in a very rigid system, in a very rigid curriculum to make and suit your learners and suit your specific context. So I think when I talk about curriculum design, I'm really talking about taking what we are mandated to do, what we have to do, and how do you work around that? and what are the things that I've learned, what are the things that I've used to help me deal with the challenges with the existing curriculum, for example.
So this might be a very controversial can of worms question,
Mm,
but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is
absolutely.
your feeling of the ATPs? Is that actually
My
working? Is
feeling,
it helping? Or is it just messing up the mud pool even more?
I love that you asked that question because, quite frankly, the ATPs were intended to structure teachers and to sort of make sure that they cover content and sort of don't get sidetracked. But at the end of the day, it misses everything about context because no two schools, no two classrooms are the same. And what it's done with this whole ATP heavy prescription, and one has to rigidly follow it, is that it's losing connection. It's making teachers worry more about compliancy and the completion of work, and not really allowing them room to say, you know what, why can't I teach topic 7 now and maybe topic 6 later? And when one does, ask the people in policy and say, how do we work around it? Honestly, I haven't found anyone who's given any real tangible advice as to say, can one actually do that? Because if one was to skip or move, then they are not compliant, and then that is an issue. But also, what does it do to teacher autonomy and teachers as professionals to say, in my professional judgment, this is what's working? Or are we just meant to just be implementers of a curriculum? And that's, for the most part, that's mainly what it's become.
I totally agree with you. It does take away the professionality or the professionalism of a teacher who is there
Mm,
because they have studied to be there. It's
yes.
somebody who's got a passion to be there. If I look at myself, I'm not a teacher. I often say I don't
Mm,
have enough hair on my teeth to be a teacher.
mm,
Even though my subject of choice is mathematics and I love
yes.
mathematics very, very much, I cannot stand in a classroom. I just don't have the
Mm,
personality. I don't have the patience, maybe. I
mm,
don't know what it is that I don't have, but I can't function in a class of 30 or 40 learners where I'm
mm,
working against the clock. So my field, my operation field really, or my operating table, if I can call it that, is in the afternoons when time is no longer a problem. That's when I, as a tutor, can really get involved because now I can spend 2 or 3 hours on one concept with that individual learner.
yes.
If need be, I'm using technology to help me with that. Normal extra
Yes.
classes also don't allow for that, but
Yes.
that is me as a tutor, and I'm always very careful to draw a distinction between tutoring or tutors and
Mm,
teachers. And sometimes the line does get blurred, granted, but I do think teachers are very often sidelined as almost cannon fodder. I think to a certain extent
yes.
by the, you call it the leadership. I don't know
Mm,
how far or how low down to the teachers you consider leadership. Does it start with the principal and deputy principal and then go
mm,
all the way up to the minister, or does it start a little bit
mm,
higher? I mean, we don't have to put anybody
mm,
on the spot there. It's just, I personally believe, and this has been a theme. I think you have watched a couple of the episodes that I have published so
yes.
far. So you would have seen that I'm very adamant that the teachers should not be replaced in this whole AI discussion.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, the teachers should be
Yes.
central, very, very
Yes.
central in this whole thing.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
why I'm bringing up the ATPs is, as a tutor, I have discovered now in the second term, because
Yes.
I've developed since February of this year, I've developed a weekly system for my students, the ones that I tutor, and I do follow the
Yes.
ATPs very strictly because it gives me something to work with a group of students. So I do find the
Yes.
structure of the ATPs to a certain extent helpful, but I'm married to a teacher. And
Mm.
she told me that, they're starting now, this week where we are now, they're starting
Yes.
with exams. What do they call them? Control
Yes.
tests or something like that.
Yes,
You
that's
can't
right.
even
That's right.
talk about exams anymore. But according
Yes.
to the ATPs, they should be working until the 11th or the 17th of June, and only then
Absolutely.
start with revision and exams. And I'm wondering to myself, I mean, me as a tutor find this very difficult because what do I prepare my students for in the last 2 or 3 weeks before the exams? Because now I'm
Yes.
rushing forward against the ATPs, and how much
Yes.
more do the teachers have to do that? And if you start thinking
Now,
about the grade 12s, sorry, just
yeah,
putting another one on the table, the grade
sure.
12s, I mean, they are even more stressed for time because the curriculum, CAPS curriculum, and I think
Mm.
the ATPs allow for a lot more class time than what they physically experience in class because of the exams and the admin and everything that comes with it. So,
Yes.
how do we navigate around this by keeping the teachers still central?
Yes. I mean, speaking to that point exactly, often the big disconnect is ATP sets out, yes, the work according to the weeks. But what happens is the deadline for the checking of marks and the scheduling of the submission does not correlate with the ATP. So the ATP says, yes, you can assess in that week. But I'm telling you, if you were to do it exactly like that, many teachers wouldn't be able to complete sort of the administrative part that is required by the department for teachers to do and for schools to do and to submit it in time. So it's almost very ironic, um, to say the least. And many times at our schools, you try your best to put the assessments as late as possible in order to be compliant and allow for revision. But to be perfectly honest, I have seen firsthand how difficult that is in terms of being then compliant with administrative admin. And one of the biggest disparities we have is we have things in the department where two departments don't actually speak to each other. The one sets that out, the other one sets that out, and the communication is very poor. And this is, to me, I think, the root of the problem in this particular instance.
So, if we now need to fix this, because I think to a certain
Mm.
extent, even a large extent, this is the field in which you live and breathe.
Yes.
The contradictions and the policies and things that sometimes just don't make sense. Like you say, they don't speak to each other.
Mm.
How do
Mm.
we fix this? And now coming back to the theme of this podcast, now that AI is looming on the
Mm.
horizon, I mean, what is your feeling? Where are teachers going? With this thing, is it coming, or is it maybe coming, or is it not coming? What is your feeling?
My feeling is that it is here and it's not going to go anywhere. I think the problem comes in with the implementation of the AI. Not that AI is going to overtake schools or it's going to not make teachers relevant. I think it's the fact that we struggle to implement and to plan the pedagogy, how we teach, how will we implement it, how will we use this tool effectively to enhance teaching and learning is the problem. And what I've often found is that what happens is many times working within the department, you find that the discussion and the protocols and the instruction comes way after it's been used extensively. Like, for example, if you look at assessment, that is the biggest problem at the moment because the kids are using AI for assessments, but it's not the kids' fault. We need to look at how we assess, is the issue. And that's going to take work. That's going to take, are you assessing questions that they can just plug into AI and get the answer. And I think even higher education is having the same problem as well. So what's happening is, as in the public sector, we in education, we don't keep up with what's happening in reality. And then we want to go back later and tell everyone, okay, this is what you're going to do, when already habits have formed, bad teaching practices formed, people are using it incorrectly, some use it, some don't. And that often comes from not having a proper plan from the beginning and not saying, hey, it's here, what are we going to do? How are we planning for it? And I think that is fundamentally the issue. And some schools will get it right, especially those who are well resourced, those who are thinking ahead, those who have leadership with that kind of mindset. And the rest will just wait to be told what to do. And at that point, it will almost be too late, almost always too in retrospect. We should have. So I think there needs to be a lot more foresight when it comes to the public sector as to things are here. We need to realize it's a reality, it's here to stay. How are we planning for it? And how do we plan to make this a useful tool, something that can then aid and support what we existingly, the challenges that we have in teaching in the classroom, etc.
Well, what I have found from my side, as the host on this podcast, is that right from the beginning, there needs to be a distinction drawn between AI in the classroom and
Mm,
AI as a learning tool. It's two
I hear
separate
you.
case studies, it's two separate experiments, it's two separate applications. You cannot really mix the two unless you have, like you rightly said, a well resourced school where
Mm,
the AI tool can be used inside the classroom. Because
yes.
if you don't have, and I mean, a lot of schools are going cell phone free and device free.
Mm,
It's almost like we're shooting ourselves in the foot here because they are
yes.
going away from the technology in the classroom even more. And so to tell a teacher to use whatever tool, and I've
Mm,
seen a lot of them. I've had guests on this podcast that have developed tools like that, which can be
mm,
used by the teacher in the classroom.
mm,
Um, and although it's brilliant in its design, when you
mm,
have a school where the learners don't have devices, they cannot bring the
mm,
cell phones in, they do not have tablets, they do not have laptops, the school might have
mm,
a computer lab. I don't
mm,
really know how that is going to play out in terms of the teacher side of the AI. Because the
mm,
policies might come and say you need to use X, Y, and Z platform in the classroom, but
mm,
what for? The time is already so limited for the teachers. Now they need to do things that are not going to add real value to the learning side. And that brings me to the learner side itself. And I'm going to ask this to you, to try and
mm,
maybe identify a definition or a solution. What exactly do you see is the word learning? Because you mentioned assessment, and typically
mm,
assessments will be to measure the understanding, the learning of
mm.
a student in whatever subject.
Yes.
But what would you say? What is the word learning on the learner side, the student side, that AI can actually help with, if at all?
I think fundamentally learning actually happens once when you are critically thinking about the content and not simply regurgitating or understanding things and points and ideas in isolation. So when you're learning, you are able to understand a concept at its core, but you're also able to connect it to other related things. And I have seen and experienced, in my opinion, is that sometimes, and all due respect to all teachers, sometimes the breakdown comes in their own capacity to take learners to that critical thinking stage and extend them to that. And that's the part where the humanness, the part that AI can't just do on its own. And that's where the upskilling of teachers and our skills and how we assess and how we learn and how we question kids and how we guide their thinking will need to improve, because now with AI around, asking kids the simple, straightforward verbatim has its merit, but that can also already be helped and aided with AI. It's about you now taking them to that next step, to that next level. And that requires you being able to also connect the dots, if you will, and connect the concept. So to me, learning is you when things are not understood only in isolation, when there's a connection made. And that's when I think we get to more of the higher order type thinking, which I think is sorely lacking at the moment.
I want to mention something about the teacher in your comment just now, but I just quickly want to interrupt my train of thought first by going to the definition of learning. You know, over the
Mm,
episodes, I've taken it from learning to mastery, and
mm,
as a definition. So once you've
mm,
mastered the topic, then you can say
mm,
learning has taken place. And then I actually
mm,
had one guest who took it one step further, and she said, you know what, maybe we should define it as you can create something with the knowledge.
mm,
And I thought that
mm,
was quite
mm,
profound. You know, that ties
mm,
in with what you just said,
mm,
linking across topics, across subjects, because you
mm,
can actually create something, a mental picture
mm,
or a new question or a new discussion, a debate, whatever the case is,
mm,
when you've really learned. So I think that is a very
mm,
important concept to remember, is that learning
mm,
is not just, as you rightly said, it's not just about memorizing and regurgitating
mm,
facts.
mm,
But you also mentioned the higher level, higher order levels, and that made me think
mm.
of a person. I don't know if you've seen her on LinkedIn. I think it's Tina Austin. She's come up with a thing called Unbloom, not Bloom's
Oh,
taxonomy, but
okay.
unbloom. So basically, what she says, if you look at the structure, the pyramid structure of Bloom's
Mm.
taxonomy, where you get to the top, that is actually where creation comes in. You know,
Yes,
the complex questions, level 3 and level
yes,
4. But
yes.
according to her, that was never what what's his name? What is Bloom's name? I can't remember the person's name, but Dr. Bloom,
I can't.
you know,
Yes.
he actually came up with something which is different from what we know today in terms of Bloom's
Mm,
taxonomy. But she came up with this idea of like a spiral, a circle with
mm,
arrows going around and
mm,
around, and she calls that
mm,
unbloom, where
mm,
you can tie in anywhere. You don't start at the bottom and go up the pyramid. You just tie in anywhere, because of the fact that your level 1 and level 2 questions are now being done like this with AI. You know, you can get the
mm,
answers very quickly. There's no learning involved, there's no research involved. You
mm,
just get it. So, where
mm,
exactly does Bloom's taxonomy now come in? And I find it very
mm,
fascinating, that she calls it
mm.
unbloom. Because it's
Yes.
it's it's taking Bloom's taxonomy into the AI era. So I'm waiting for
Mm,
her to confirm. She agreed for a podcast as well, but we haven't had a chance to agree on a date yet. But I'm hoping to actually have her on as a guest as well, to
yes.
talk a little bit more about what she means with unbloom. But I want
Yes.
to make a statement and then hear what you say about that. When we talk about the teachers, like you said, maybe needed to be trained,
Mm,
to guide the students better,
mm,
where would you find the time as a teacher in a 45-minute period with 30 or more kids in front of you to guide them individually, to master whatever they need to master, in terms of, let's say, for argument's sake, a specific topic in the curriculum?
mm.
You know, I'm sure you've thought about this a lot.
Yes.
Where
Yes,
where
I
where would
have.
the
I
teacher
have. I have.
find
I have.
time?
The honest problem is that in that 45 minutes, It's almost virtually impossible to do that. And that I think everyone would agree with. The problem comes in, we always approach teaching so bottom heavy, meaning we're always targeting those that are struggling the most, okay, which isn't necessarily bad, but we then leave the others out, and we don't have enough time to enrich them and extend them. So in my experience, what I've had to do was almost incorporate a blended type of learning environment where I am able to extend the notional time of teaching outside of strictly the hours that I am given to cover the content. Because once we're able to get off the out of the in class, in contact teaching, and content is uploaded elsewhere, discussions are held elsewhere, lessons are out, recorded and uploaded elsewhere, it allows for that extra time of flexibility where the child's able to view the content, ask questions, but also to do so in their own time. And I think something I have seen and experienced personally is that many people will say, okay, fine, not everyone has access to the technology or their phones. And yes, I agree with that. They don't. But they just might not necessarily have access to it that minute. I would find, and I did this even in my own study, was I would end up getting a lot of interaction online because they're able to do it on a weekend. They're able to do it when they have access to Wi-Fi. They're able to do it just not specifically at a specific time. So we sort of doubt the fact that it doesn't rigidly mean if we're having a live online lesson now or a live, tutor lesson or whatever the case is, whatever support we're providing, that the child necessarily needs to be there in that moment. Yes, some can, but many of them, in my experience, would view the content, would view the questionnaires, the all the additional resources, and actually then respond later and ask questions, via online. Listen, I looked at this. What do you think, etc.? Can you assist? And then we were able to take it from there. So I think we need to sometimes remember that there is a place for tools like AI, for stuff like what you're doing, to be practically implemented. And for people not to simply say, well, listen, the kid doesn't have their phone at school. But trust me, most times they'll have access to it later. They'll have access to it on the weekend. They'll have access to whenever they need to. And I think basically what I'm trying to say is we underestimate how resourceful they are to a large extent. I'm not saying that in its entirety that every single person has it easy, but I would end up having at least 70% of the learners I teach engaging in the online content regularly. And I also found something very interesting is that, in-class teaching, a lot of children don't necessarily feel comfortable asking questions in that platform. And as kids are developing, they do a lot of things with technology. And I would find a lot of them would prefer engaging with a direct message, with a direct question, when it's not in front of their peers per se, which I found very interesting.
Yeah, from my
Mm,
perspective as a maths tutor, I
mm,
focus like 120% on questions. For me, that is the
mm,
backbone of mathematics mastery, is you need to learn
mm,
how to ask questions. So when AI came
mm,
along, I bought into that immediately because for me,
mm,
prompt engineering is just another way of asking a question. So right from
mm,
2023, when I first encountered ChatGPT, I thought this is brilliant. I'm going to have a
mm,
tool now to convince people to do more mathematics because
mm,
it's a way of teaching them more questions. But
mm,
I want to say something a little bit controversial, about what you've just described. And
mm,
hear me out, and then please answer on that point as honestly as you can from
Mm,
your own perspective as a teacher who seems to go the extra mile and the teachers that you deal with.
mm,
A teacher that is available for the learners after class, after school,
mm,
online, WhatsApp, online classes,
mm,
resources, material, recorded lessons,
mm,
whatever there is, whatever technology, and I'm specifically
mm.
taking AI out of it now. Let's talk
Yes,
about before AI, up until two,
yes,
3 years ago.
yes.
Do teachers really have that time, that dedication, and that commitment to actually sacrifice family time to be available
No,
for the kids after
that is
hours?
a that is an excellent question. I think that's an excellent question because what's nice is that I actually did it and I could see how did I manage also having a family, also having a life out of school. And I think the case is about being creative about it. It didn't mean that every single day I was online uh, doing stuff with the learners. Sometimes I would have often recorded content that I had done in class, which I then would just upload. So in my case, it was just about a little bit of planning and a little bit about being creative and being open-minded. I think that's the important thing. I found that, you know, a lot of my some of my colleagues, for example, get very scared at these discussions about a tool or something else that can aid them. But often that fear just comes from not understanding it properly or understanding that it can actually be useful. And if it were, they would benefit from it too. And it would also give some relief to some other areas, uh, that they struggle with in their teaching. So I find that, as I said earlier, if we started developing and thinking of how are we going to handle these things properly and guiding teachers from early on, I think sometimes we could get a better, response. And to your point, one of the things I think we could do better is teachers should be mentoring other teachers, meaning often the people giving the instruction are not the people in a classroom there every day. Instead of teacher X, and they call this professional community groups that teachers should have, but you can't just suggest that to people in general. Incentivize teachers. Hey, come along. You do this pretty well. Come to the next meeting and show us how you taught that particular concept in that creative way. And that's what we're not doing. We're using our formal contact with department officials to simply talk compliance again, instead of teacher X from down the road teaches this well. Guys, come, let's look and see how you can do it. And let that person tell you how they dealt with their challenges or what worked and what didn't. And for me, I think that could help address a lot of that problem. If the good teachers, the ones that are trying things, are doing things, had the more platform, more space to say, hey, come along, show us, teach us, and guide us in that way. Instead of letting these very good, very talented, very experienced teachers sit in a meeting to have passively, and I'm going to be honest with you, have slides read to them, which should have just been emailed to them anyway. And yes, I know that is very controversial.
Well, I mean, like I said, I'm not a teacher, but I've heard the stories, and yeah, it's
It
it's
sounds
it's
about similar.
as an outsider, I often refer to it as box ticking exercises. That's all it
Yes,
is. All these reports that need to be filled in after assessments, all these forms that have to be filled in, all the
yeah,
admin that are loaded onto teachers, in my opinion, is just a box ticking exercise most of the time, because somebody just needs to say, I've done it and I've policed
yeah.
it, and I can put it in file 13 and forget about it until next time. And
But Harry, even to your point, sorry if I could just add in there, The other really challenging part is that that is then how teachers are primarily assessed on how compliant they are with that tick box exercise. And to me, that is so disheartening because that says nothing about how good they are as teachers. So I'm a great administrator, but how well do I actually implement that? Well, that's not really a big focus of assessment. And again, it speaks to the autonomy. Again, it's uh, well, we're not really, wanting you to think for yourself. Just follow this and then you're good. And then you're doing your job really well. So don't worry about extending your thinking or your teaching or your creativity to the extent you're talking about.
But this then brings me to, I think, where this discussion really started, in terms of what's going to happen when the department wakes up and say, whoa, we need to get AI implemented in the classroom because it's happening in Australia, it's happening in Europe, it's happening in
Mm,
Britain, it's happening in America.
mm,
We're going to get left behind unless we start forcing something more on the
mm,
teachers. What is the scope? What, in your opinion? I mean, if
mm,
the leaders, in inverted commas,
mm.
if they
Yeah.
are now suddenly waking up one morning and say, okay, we need to get AI into the classroom, what exactly is that going to look like?
That needs to, that, getting AI into the classroom would actually need to start simply, in my opinion, by getting other teachers who are using it and other people who are implementing it daily to literally show and demonstrate, right, I did this, I taught this, because often what happens is you can't talk to teachers about it in general. You need to bring it down to, right, we were teaching this maths concept. I taught them this. Then instead of giving them homework, I did this or I did that. And some of them handed in this way, others handed in that way, and that's how I accommodated for the different scenarios in my classroom, etc., etc. So I think one of the big issues is that we have a lot of people talking about education, talking about what's right, and we're not giving enough space to the lived experience, the person on the ground. What are they doing? What are they finding? And why aren't they included enough in the discussion? They're always spoken about, but never to. They're never part of the engagement. And I think that is a big, big problem. And I think to be honest, I think that's a pain that many teachers carry, where they feel uh, not listened to, not really heard, and their voice doesn't really matter, is what they essentially told, and hence kills the spirit to try, kills the spirit to be innovative, to embrace change, because it's like, you know what, I rather stick to what's safe. I rather stick to what's compliant because that's what's rewarded, not innovation, more your tick box exercises. And the more they would see others doing it, because I'm telling you now, there's many teachers, I'm sure, who think, oh, maybe it's only kids in the more affluent schools that can do it. And that's not necessarily true. It's about you being able to see somebody who's doing it in a similar situation to you and being like, oh, I see that. Okay, so I want to go back and try. Let's figure it out together. I think that is what needs to happen.
I would definitely agree with you, in let's call it the resistance to change
Mm,
of technology, because I've read an article last night, this morning actually, where somebody said, so in so many words, and I'll put that up, on overlay when I edit this video later on, where essentially it comes down to the fact that most edtech companies want to please the shareholders. So they come up
ah,
with all
yes.
these different solutions for teachers, but
Mm,
and the author literally said so in so many words that those people have never had a foot in the classroom. They've got no
Yes.
idea what's happening in the classroom, but they come with all these fancy marketing speak of, this is the solution and this is going to make your life easier, etc.,
Mm,
without really understanding what happens at the coalface inside the classroom.
mm,
And I think from where I'm sitting as this podcast host, what I have found, and I'm going to stick to my guns on this, and I'm sure you'll agree, is the teacher should be central, even
yes.
more so today in AI. We don't know what is
Yes.
coming with AI. We don't know. Whatever
Mm,
the department is going to decide
mm,
is going to be the benchmark or the metric for the
mm,
teachers to start using AI. We don't
mm,
know. I mean, like I said, they can wake up one morning and decide, we've got another box to tick.
mm,
However, we need to, from people who talk about this, you and me and all the other people
mm,
that I've spoken to and still will speak to on this
mm.
podcast, we need to understand one very important thing, and that is that the teacher is central. We
Yes.
cannot take the teacher out of it. Now, we can use fancy words for that. We can say it's
Yes.
empathy, it's the humanness, it's the humanity,
Yes.
it's the nurturing of a typical teacher, that nurturing ability. We can have other words like pedagogy and guardrails,
Mm,
to sound more like an AI
mm,
discussion. But ultimately, the teacher needs to be central in this whole thing. We need to listen more to what the teachers say. And that's why I asked you earlier about learning, just the word learning, because a teacher knows just by looking at the body language who of the
yes.
learners sitting there in front of him or her has actually understood what I just tried to explain. Unfortunately, there's
Yes.
no time, for those teachers to in a typical period to address every single one of the expressions that they see in front of them.
Mm,
But I think, and this is where I would like to take the conversation maybe, is
mm.
AI a tool that can solve that? Because it can now duplicate the teacher outside of the classroom. What do you think?
I think that is a brilliant question. You know why? Because I think if we continue on the path we're going, where we are pushing the compliance issue and we are pushing the tick box exercise, then you are going to allow AI to take hold of that teacher because that teacher is then not reflecting enough, not thinking enough about what's working, how am I assessing, what am I doing, and can I actually think for myself? Is that even allowed? And if we don't start encouraging and listening to teachers to say, hey, you know what? Let's I want to cover the ATP like this and that. I'm meeting the targets. I'm producing the results. Let me navigate it this way and just give them a bit of space. But the problem actually comes in, and I think it's a fundamental issue. Yes, in this country, we do have a lot of inexperienced and very teachers with a lot of limited capabilities, etc., etc. Hence, the big support that CAPS brings, that the ATPs bring, etc. But with that being said, how do we uplift and upskill the educator if we don't say, here's the benchmark of a good lesson? Come and see a good lesson. How many of those teachers have seen a good lesson, have seen it in action, watched it? Or are we not, many of us, teaching just the way we were taught and literally following that same, you know, roadmap, if you will? And I think that's the shift that needs to happen. And the schools that pick up on that faster to say, hey, let's see, come and show me. I'm teaching this, I'm doing that. What do I do? How did you do it? I think then you would get a lot more buy-in because most times people are spoken to. Somebody comes to the school, they say, I'm offering X project or X tool, Y, X, Y, and Z. And most people have just switched off. Um, not too long ago, there was a particular company that, also, came to present something about teaching teachers how to use, a particular AI tool. But you miss the connection. You can't just put somebody online for 15 minutes, show them, okay, this can do that, that can do that. You actually need someone to come. Let's do a lesson. This is what I'm doing. Look where I'm putting it up. You have to do it that way. You can't just say, okay, here's the tool. If you want, you can log on here afterwards. And what ends up happening is that a lot of teachers at the moment do use AI, but they're using it for a lot of administrative duties. It helps them with lesson planning, a lot of other administrative stuff, which yes does have its place, but they haven't gotten to the point of, okay, so how can I actually use this to improve my teaching? And not just, oh, okay, I can make a couple of cool worksheets using a few AI tools. And primarily, to be honest, a lot of the companies that I've seen present often are punting just that. Hey, we have a thing, I think uh, guess what? It can help you make beautiful worksheets and beautiful resources, which, with due respect, does have its place. But that's just the tip of the iceberg of the extent to which we could actually use AI effectively. And, there's often that saying that, years ago, people were scared that calculators were going to ruin mathematics. Oh, if there's a calculator, kids are never going to think for themselves. Then Google came along and we thought, oh, well, now there's the internet. No one's ever going to think for themselves. So we always get very afraid until we actually know how to use the tool and implement it correctly.
But the thing is, with AI, there seems to be something else than just another type of technology. You reference now the
Mm,
calculator.
mm,
I don't know if in some of the episodes that you've watched, you heard me talk about this will AI revolutionize education discussion. So just in summary, this guy called Derek Muller is the owner, the author, main author of a YouTube channel called Veritasium. And
mm,
I think there's past 20 million subscribers already. And it's a very
mm,
popular YouTube channel. And he's got the knack of taking difficult science and difficult mathematics and making it interesting. Which he
mm,
needs to do to get 20 million subscribers. I mean, that
mm,
already says something. But he had this talk at some university or something where he was literally talking about the question: will AI revolutionize education? And he had a long lead to the punchline, but it comes down to the fact that he says when Thomas Edison invented the movie projector, I actually always
mm,
reference the gramophone records, but
mm,
when I watched the episode again, I realized I had it wrong. It's when Thomas Edison invented the movie projector. He said,
mm,
we are going to revolutionize education because now we can record the teacher. And then in the 40s, 30s, and 40s, radio came in and they said, now we're going to revolutionize education because of the fact that we can now broadcast the teacher all over
mm,
the place. And then in the
mm,
70s and the 80s, they had those cassette tapes. I don't know if you remember or
mm.
seen any
I
of
do.
those. We had the little book and the
Mm,
cassette tape, and
mm,
that's going to revolutionize education. And then the computers came out, and this is going to revolutionize education. And then Google and internet came out, and this is going to revolutionize education. And the internet um, went over into mobile phones in 2007, and
mm,
this is now going to revolutionize education. And he looked back and he said, none of them have.
mm,
So what shall we draw from the fact that everybody seems to think this type of technology is going to revolutionize education, and it never has, and it probably never will. And he said the reason for that is the teacher. Just simply the fact that there's a teacher who can have group discussions, PM discussions with the kids, literally stimulate them to talk inside
mm,
the classroom to learn a little bit about what it is that they
mm,
need to learn. But what AI can do differently, I think, from everything else, in the sense that it's based on a large language model, it's got
mm,
reasoning capacity, where
mm,
all your other technologies did not have reasoning capacity. Is the
mm,
fact that it can take and you mentioned it about the teaching. Literally the teacher teaching can now be extended outside of the classroom, because that teacher knows what he or she knows. They've done it year in and year out. They know what works, what doesn't. And you can take that context and you can give it to a large language model within guardrails. And this is the important thing. Just giving it to ChatGPT or Claude or any of the other large language models is not sufficient, because they have no guardrails for education. But within certain guardrails, if your teacher can take that reasoning capacity of the large language model and say, I'm busy with this, whatever this is, let's take it home. Let's go and talk a little bit more about it. Let's go and have some kind of a discussion about it. In my specific context, that discussion very often revolves questions and questions back and forth, between the student and the AI. And what makes AI so brilliant, in my opinion, is the fact that it can have that discussion with the student. And you'll find that some students think of novel ways about what they learned. Other students will just want to get it over and done with. But ultimately, there's a discussion that the AI can do for every single one of the students, where a teacher cannot. I mean, there's just not enough time in the classroom, and there is not really scope to be available, as we discussed earlier, after hours. Because of family time, because of private time, because of all the admin and the marking and the reports and everything that needs to be done at home, a teacher just simply cannot be there 24/7 for every one of their students. But AI can make it possible to a certain extent to accomplish that. Do you agree with me? Is that a future of AI in education, where we actually involve the teacher pedagogy, the human person who literally writes the guardrails and say, these are my guardrails, this is my steps, this is my pedagogy. Go and do it for 30 or 40 or 100 students.
I think that that is absolutely correct, and I think it absolutely has a place. You know why? Because what are kids doing now? A concept is poorly taught, or they don't really understand something. Instead of asking for help, they're actually going back home and asking AI, listen, explain photosynthesis to me to a 12-year-old level. And it's then trying to generate and assist them. And what's happening is, instead of us embracing it and saying, you know what, let's get a hold on this and let's try and make sure that we are actually guiding them correctly, not just in the classroom, knowing that this is going to be a tool that they're going to use and that's not going anywhere, and can supplement the explanation and can supplement the in-class teaching. And I think that's one of the main things that needs to come across. We can't just say a fear of, well, is AI going to take teachers away? No. Kids still need that human connection. They still need somebody to sometimes give them a tap on the shoulder. They still need that physical contact. But with that being said, let's get on it. Let's realize that they live in that world. I've always said this to my kids. You live in a world where everything's digital. You order your food online, you do your you do that, and then they come to school and I tell you to draw a poster. And I often say to them, you're never going to do that. You're going to make an infographic on Canva or whatever. Why can't you submit it both ways? Why can't you have it, if you want to do it that way or the other way? And allowing that space, you see, allowing that space to say, let's try this, let's try that. To be honest, does require a great deal of planning and effort on the teacher's part. But more importantly, I think it's getting our teachers excited about this again. Instead of, oh, woe is me, here's another task I have to do. Because actually what I found is that it actually becomes quite invigorating. Because what's as you said about earlier about the teacher being central to everything, the passion is being drained. The enthusiasm is drained for excitement, because when they were studying, they were excited to impart knowledge, to try things, to be creative. And then we suck that all out of them. And now the first sign of, hey, let's be creative, people's first thought is, oh God, another task. I'm not doing it. So that's why I think, projects like yours and what you're trying to do are very, very important things, because it's saying, let's work together. There's a place for it, there's a need for it, and it can be useful and beneficial to enhance what we're doing and what teachers are doing and how kids can get extra support and intervention can actually happen with the aid of AI as well, which I think is quite interesting and important.
Yeah, but the thing is, from where I'm sitting as an entrepreneur, as an outsider in the of the classroom, I mean, I'll be the first, like I said right at the start, I'll be the first to admit I cannot survive in a classroom. So we have to get more respect for teachers. We have to, because
Yes.
teachers they're just a totally different species, being able to sit with all the challenges, all the work, all the admin, and still teach. I wouldn't. I would turn around and walk away, literally,
Yeah.
But if we talk about the educational side of it, and I want to come back, this is
Mm,
coming a long way around back to the teacher as being
mm,
a central pivot in this whole situation.
mm.
I do a lot of research, I watch a lot of videos, I read a lot of articles, and there's a lot of focus with AI on disrupting industries, like for instance coding.
Yes.
Anybody
Yes.
can now create a pretty decent website or some kind of an app or something
Mm,
like that. And there's this whole worldwide discussion on, should we now still be studying computer science? I don't know if you heard about
mm.
Meta, Facebook.
Yes.
They laid off 10% of their staff last week. I think it was last week
Mm,
Wednesday. There was a deadline for something like 7 or 8 thousand
mm,
people who were laid off. They were fired. No longer needed. We're going to spend our money now on AI because the remaining 90% of the staff can do the same work as the original 100% because they have AI. So there are certain industries where the AI is really disruptive. Graphic design, website design, coding, to a large extent, data analysis, all those things AI can do in the blink of an eye. But there seems to be a lot of, water trading in the industry for education. And I sit back and I really enjoy this because I think you guys, you're coming at this from the wrong approach. You're trying to make AI fit where the teacher currently is. And it's not going to work. And you're going to constantly
mm,
find that it's not working, as Thomas Edison
mm,
found 100 years ago.
mm.
You have to come back to the teacher as the person who knows what's going on. It's not just about the fancy word pedagogy. It's about that person knowing what works
Yes.
and what doesn't, and get that person's opinion. Don't come down with a policy and say you must X, Y, and Z, because you are going to find resistance because it's probably not going to work. And coming back to your remark about what I do, is I'm really trying to get the teachers to understand that. I mean, this podcast
Mm,
exists because of that. I want to get teachers who listen or watch the videos to hear it very clearly, episode after episode. The teacher is important. It is just one of those non-negotiables. We cannot take the teacher out of this equation because no learning is going to take place if no teaching takes place. And AI
yes.
can provide an answer, but it cannot
Mm,
teach unless
mm,
it is given the pedagogy and the
mm,
guardrails. You
mm,
mentioned that the kids go home and they just give it to ChatGPT, but if you really think about what they get in return, if they get a homework question and they just give it to ChatGPT, they get the full answer. They don't get
mm,
guidance. They don't get
mm,
friction. They don't get
mm,
learning. They just get the answer because that is how the
mm,
large language models are written. That's
mm,
how they perform. They are supposed
mm,
to please the human by just getting as
mm,
much information as possible. So
mm,
when a student just copies the answers down, we can safely assume that no learning has taken place. Coming back to our
mm,
previous discussion on that point, there's no
mm.
mastery of the concept. Whatever subject it is, there is no mastery because it's just a simple question of copying and pasting whatever the
Yes.
large language model produced. So, how do we change the large language model into a teacher or a tutor, then, for that matter, speaking into my field? We have to get pedagogy involved. I don't see
Mm.
any other way. I really don't see how these companies are going to fix AI in education without bringing in the teachers in the first place.
I think any teacher who heard you just say that now would give you a round of applause because everyone is always talking about them as if they aren't central to it. And you're 100% right. We are central to it because a lot of teaching has to do with the hidden curriculum, the picking up on the mood, the picking up on, okay, I think this worked, and no, they look a bit confused. I need to stop. I need to pause. That kind of reflective practice. And to just negate that and say, right, you're going to teach that, and then we're going to upload it online, and then that's it, loses all context again and makes everything feel generic and impersonal and takes the human out of it. So, so I absolutely agree that the teacher has to be central to it. And I think with that in mind, that already would make a lot of teachers feel, yes, exactly. Um, this is how I experience my class. This is what I have the challenges. These are the sort of socio-economic issues and stuff that I battle with the kids. Um, how can we assist? How can AI help me? How can it help to explain the stuff to them in a way I think will help them understand it better? So definitely, the two things can't not work symbiotically.
I think I've mentioned this to you before, but I just want to quickly say it again that to stress the importance of the teacher in this whole process. When we talk
Mm,
in the language of AI or in the language of
mm,
computers and coding, we've got software engineers,
mm,
we've got network engineers, we've got prompt engineers. Just
mm,
about everybody is now some kind of an engineer. But what exactly is a teacher? And I've come up with the title that I call teachers pedagogical engineers because there's nobody
mm,
that can do pedagogy as well as the person who has done it, who knows what
mm,
works, who knows what doesn't
mm,
work. And I like to refer to teachers in the age of AI then as PEs, or
mm,
pedagogical engineers, because of the
mm,
skill that they bring to the table. And it's
mm,
not a skill that can be duplicated by
mm,
any form of technology. Whether you've got
mm,
physically a robot standing in front of the class that
mm,
it runs on AI, or whether you've just got
mm,
some kind of an app on a computer that runs on AI,
mm,
you cannot take away the human in the
mm,
process. And
mm,
that human is called the pedagogical engineer in my
mm.
my my world because it's
Yes,
so
and I love
important.
that term because ultimately, before you start teaching any content, sorry, it's always about connection. It's about understanding them. It's about getting to know them. And from that point, that's what informs your context. That's what informs your examples. That's what informs your decisions because you now realize, oh, okay, so this content you find more relevant. Oh, okay, that's why. Once it's explained in that way, you then understand them better. Because a lot of it is the relationships, the connections that are formed, the knowing their personal backgrounds and knowing their circumstances that cannot be negated. And I think that's what tends to happen when we try to put a one size fits all and say, okay, well, then let's all do it that way. then we take all context out. And I think that's why the two things need to operate together, because context is very, very important.
I think that is so valuable what you've just said. You know, it needs to be shouted from the rooftops
Mm,
because of the fact that a teacher, any teacher in any grade, in any subject, anywhere in the world, but let's say for the
mm,
sake of this conversation in South Africa,
mm.
knows exactly what the background is, or mostly what the background is of the students who
Yes,
sit there. You know,
yes,
was there alcoholism involved last night? Do
yes,
they sit in a shack with candlelight?
yes,
You know, what exactly did they have for breakfast? You know, you
yes,
know which of your kids come hungry, you know,
yes.
when they come to school. So we tend to think of the private schools and the affluent schools when we think about technology. And those schools, those rural schools or those poorer schools are very often just sidelined. You know, we have to think in terms of where they need to be, not where we are right now. And I find it unfair. Number one, I find it extremely unfair to not make provision for every single child. You know, policies like no
Mm,
child left behind, I think that was a big thing in the States a couple of years
mm,
ago.
mm,
You know, what exactly does it mean if you say
mm,
no child left behind? Is that really something? You know, can you
mm,
honestly say that no child is left behind? I had a guest that told me about a school in Umtata in the Eastern
mm,
Cape where there was 100 grade 12 learners in a class and they were literally sharing chairs. I mean, imagine that, not just sharing tables, they are sharing chairs because of the fact that the class is so big. But they are there, they come, they pitch up, they want to know something, you know, they want to learn. So they are literally sacrificing the convenience of sitting properly to be in that classroom. But what exactly is AI supposed to be doing for that child if it's being forced on a teacher with a laptop and a projector and a group of learners in the classroom who all sit there with iPads? You know, how does that
mm,
model work for those 100 kids sitting in Umtata?
mm,
It just can't.
mm.
So we have to go to that teacher that manages to get
Yes.
100 kids to pitch up and say,
Mm,
what do you think we can do? You
yes.
know, what will work? And I also
Yes.
had, I don't know if this was one episode that you watched or remembered, but I had a discussion with a principal up in Vryheid in northern KZN,
Mm,
where he was talking about the fact that they've got so much rain at times that the roads wash away
mm,
and the kids can't
mm,
come to school. So they miss 3 or 4
mm,
days because of
mm,
rain high up there in the tropical region. And he wants to get an offline solution. He literally asked me, he said, we need an offline solution for those kids when they are at home because they don't have internet. You know, they go into the rural areas, into the villages, and they just don't have internet there. But we still need to get
mm,
them some kind of a learning, otherwise they lose 3 or 4 days worth of tuition time.
mm.
And that principal, that teacher, is the person who knows best what will work.
Yes.
Not
Yes.
me sitting in Pretoria, you know, in a metropolitan area. That person who deals with those kids who literally cannot come to work because the roads washed away. You know, that's
Mm.
such a different world from where I live, for one. And I have to be the
And
first to admit it.
it's so funny because we learned so much of this during COVID, where we saw the creativity, we saw people in different contexts figuring out plans, figuring out how they would get it done, etc., etc. And we shouldn't have just left it there, you know, and said, okay, well, it's over. So now we just go back to the old way. We needed to like actually keep building on that and saying, oh, you see, okay, so what did they do? What did they do when there was no data? Did they get together? Did they meet somewhere? Was the stuff being able to be downloaded and then they're able to be shared? Or how did it work? And again, those stories matter. Those teacher stories matter. And that is why they shouldn't just be sidelined from the process because What's ironic is that it's one thing to sidestep the teacher, the soldiers on the ground, but at the same time happen to have issues with implementation and then wonder in hindsight why, when you've never actually, like you've said, thought, okay, well, this principal hasn't had his learners at his school for 3 days. Is how do you fix his context? Have you spoken to him? What do you know about it? No, I didn't. I just sort of said he needs to figure it out. Um, so yes, I think you make a very, very good point there.
Unfortunately, that's what you just said. He needs to figure it out. It's very often the boardroom approach. It's
Yes.
somebody who doesn't know what goes on at foot level.
Mm,
And what they do is, as that article that I referenced earlier, what they tend to do is they just want to keep shareholders happy and investors
yeah.
happy. It sounds good on paper. It sounds good in a boardroom when you do a PowerPoint presentation on this, but we know, and this is, I'm so glad that you came on this podcast tonight to come bring a teacher's perspective to this, where you say, you know
Mm,
what, we cannot do this without the teacher. It's very important that we need to understand that a boardroom approach is not going to fix
mm,
AI in education, no matter how hard they
mm,
try, because if you don't accommodate the teachers, you're not going to do anything really.
exactly.
And what makes AI so brilliant is that it can accommodate every single teacher, and on top of
Mm,
that, it can accommodate every single learner. Learning
mm,
styles, visual,
mm,
auditive learning.
mm,
My partner actually mentioned it one day. I wanted to mention this earlier when you were talking about explaining photosynthesis, as a
mm,
10-year-old. He said, I can go to AI now and I can say, explain quantum physics to me like I'm a 5-year-old. And
mm,
the ChatGPT or whatever will do it. It will
mm,
explain to me what quantum physics is as if I'm a 5-year-old. He said,
mm,
and maybe I do understand a little bit more about quantum physics afterwards,
mm,
but here is the distinction. I still cannot go out and claim to have PhD level knowledge and skill on quantum
yeah.
physics. I may understand it like a 5-year-old,
Mm,
but I'm certainly not a PhD level graduate
mm,
on quantum physics. And I need to understand that as the person who interacted with the AI in the beginning.
mm,
And when you go and you say to the AI, adapt to the learning style of the
mm,
student. Is there a backlog of information or skills? Is there
mm,
something missing? Is it a slow learner? Is it a fast learner? The AI can
yeah.
literally adapt on the fly
Mm,
to every single student. And I find that a very, very, very brilliant approach to learning
mm,
is by not just going to the kids with a worksheet and say, okay, here you are,
mm,
some extra practice for the exam on
mm,
Friday. You're actually going to the child and say, you know what, let's adapt to you within the guardrails that I, as the teacher,
mm.
have written.
Yeah, because what you're saying is, teachers are expected in South Africa to teach inclusivity. And within that bracket of inclusivity is this idea that the teacher should be able to be targeting their teaching to all the various levels and all the various challenges. And to be honest with you, as the years are going on, the vast array of ability and skill and whatever of the learners is so extensive that it's very, very difficult for them to provide that extra support sufficiently. And if we had something like AI assisting with that kind of thing in a useful way, it could really, really help with the support and the intervention that is actually required by the teacher. And the teacher literally can't always attend to all of that simply within an hour, or as you say, within the notional time that is given by the curriculum. Because I'll tell you, many teachers will tell you that, CAPS was designed in a way to say, if I was at school A learning this concept, I was supposed to go to school B and continue with that. Now, to me, I find that almost laughable because I've almost never found a student exactly on par, understanding everything as if it's like a seamless process. And that's because the context and the pedagogy and the teaching is so different that often, many times, when teachers will tell you when they get a new learner, they often are just deflated instantly because they know that the gaps are usually quite wide and nothing is there to really assist them. And what ends up happening is, again, the push for compliance goes. The kids that you've had along, you've maybe supported and been able to assist some or most of them. And then these ones slip through the cracks because this whole, if I go to a school in KZN, it's going to be the same as the school in Johannesburg at so and so, is very rarely the same. And their level of expertise and basic skills are not necessarily always, standardized.
Unfortunately, Tanya, we have to start winding down.
Yes,
So I want to end on a high note for teachers and AI together
yes.
by using an analogy of what is happening in the coding world, programmers, software programmers.
Okay.
There seems to be this switch internationally for yes, AI can generate the code, thousands and thousands of lines of code, but we still need the human to check, verify, make sure that whatever that code is actually worthwhile pushing out into the wide world. And if we
Mm,
think about what you've just mentioned about the different learning styles, the inclusivity, which is like the collective word
mm,
for what teachers should do, we know it's not possible in that period, that they have. It's just
mm,
simply not mathematically possible to do all of that in
mm,
the time frame. However, AI can do that. AI
mm,
can adapt to whatever learning style or whatever background information is
mm,
missing or whatever curiosity there is to go ahead
mm,
further, with the content. AI
mm,
can adapt dynamically to all of that. But the teacher, the pedagogical engineer, still needs to come
mm,
and double check that output. And I've
mm,
actually had a guest. I want to close with
mm.
the example one of my previous guests gave. He said both teachers and students need to be the custodians of the outcome. And if the teacher says, you know what, I cannot do all of this in one period, but I'm going to get AI to assist me, to assist my learners, you as the teacher still need to remember you are the custodian of that outcome. You need
Yes,
to check
yes,
that that outcome is actually being achieved. And
yes,
that is what makes the teacher so valuable in the process.
yes.
Like those software engineers who are retained, who are
Mm,
not fired, they are
mm,
retained because of their value in checking the output. In the same
yes.
way, a teacher needs to understand that their value lies not just, I mean, this is important, the fact that they are humans and they've got empathy and nurturing in the classroom, but more than that, as a pedagogical engineer, to use my technical term,
Mm, mm.
they are able to check the outcome, of that exercise. So if you want to
Absolutely.
comment on that, you're more than welcome, in a closing comment. But unfortunately, we can carry on this conversation for many more hours, I think.
I know,
But
I know. So, yes, just in closing, to our discussion, I just want to say this is such an important discussion and such an important thing we're talking about because we also need to talk about here in South Africa. What are we doing here? Um, are we thinking and planning ahead? Or are we just going to sit on the lament of, well, this is not right and that's not right and whatever, but we're not talking solutions. We're not talking, okay, this is the thing. Let's figure it out. Let's do it. And that's usually the hard stuff, you know, the thinking, the figuring out, and which you are doing so well with your projects coming up. So yes, I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity. I am deeply honored and grateful to be part of your podcast and to contribute my, small nugget of wisdom and experience that I've had. And so, yes, thank you very much to you.
It's only a pleasure, but I think that the real thanks goes to you. You know, you sacrificed your time to come and speak to me tonight, so I really appreciate that. And I want to extend an invitation to you, any
Mm,
teacher who listens or watches this episode, if you want to come back on, if there's something that you want to
mm,
talk about, just let me know. We schedule a session. This is an open invitation whenever there's something to be added to this whole idea of
yes,
where are we going with AI in education. So
yes.
remember that. But thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Harry. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.